Hey everyone, so welcome. Thank you for joining us, taking time out of your day to attend our first community call of the year. So we are in a new administration and we're really excited to just share what's in store, what's on our radars for the Biden administration and kick off this year with a cool call with our field, policy, and California team all in attendance. So without further ado, I'll just go ahead and introduce myself and pass it along to the rest of the folks on the call. So if you've attended our community calls before, you've probably seen my name or my face. My name is Alyssa Talabot. I'm the senior field manager and I use she, her, hers pronouns. So I will kick it off to Com next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Com Moore. I'm CREC's Director of National Policy, and my pronouns are he and his. Kicking it over to Mandy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mandy Deese. I'm the Director of California, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. Sending it over to Sina.
Hi, everyone. This is Sina. I am the project manager and calling from Washington State. Welcome. Kicking it over to our TA, Gina.
Hi, everyone. This is Gina Lee. I'm CREC's Field Associate. Pronouns are she, her, hers, calling in from Washington, D.C. And finally, I will throw things over to Phoebe.
Hey, everybody. Like Gina, I'm also calling in from Washington, D.C. I'm CREC's Operation Manager, and I use she, her, her pronouns.
Great, thank you so much. So just a bit of housekeeping and logistics as we get started. All attendees will be placed on mute. To comment or question, you have to be logged into the Zoom webinar and feel free to ask questions or comment throughout. If you're joining us on Facebook Live, we do have a team member, Sina, who is monitoring those comments and questions that come in, so feel free to send those our way in that avenue. And we'll have Q&A at the end, so if you don't hear your comment or your question addressed, just hang tight and we'll try to get to those at the end or in a follow-up after the call. And just to go over what to expect for today's agenda, we will be going over, as you might have seen from the description and the title, our policy priorities for the Biden administration. That's why we have our policy team, both from national and California, joining us today. And then we'll also give a roundup of our campaigns and initiatives that we have going on, finish up with announcements, and then, like I mentioned, address some Q&A. All right, and it wouldn't be a CREC community call if we didn't start off with some polls just to get to know who's on the line. So if you've joined us before, you're familiar with this, but if you haven't, we like to just get a sense of who's here. So our questions today are, how many community calls have you attended? Where are you joining us from today? In what capacity are you joining us? And generally, what are you feeling? And if you don't see any of your responses here, feel free to send them our way through the chat or the questions function. So we'll just give folks a few minutes to just fill that out and we'll see what we have. All right, we're gonna wait for about 90% of folks to respond. So just maybe a few more seconds for folks to get those in. Great, so let's see what we got. So, all right, so we have an interesting mix of folks for 36%. This is your first community call, so welcome. But for the same percentage, you've attended 4 or more. So thanks so much for sticking around with us and continuing to join us on these calls. In terms of where folks are joining us from. The majority look like they're from the West Coast, so thanks for starting your mornings off with us. And then we have some representation from the East Coast and Midwest as well, and it looks like we'll have to circulate to our partners in the South. In terms of what capacity folks are joining us from, looks like the majority are from community-based organizations, so welcome. We know you all are totally, strapped for capacity a lot of the time, so thanks so much for just taking time out of the day to join us. We also have a large percentage who are just individual community members who are advocates and want to get involved, so thank you so much also for joining us. We also have folks from national orgs, researchers, students, and other. And if you identify in the other category, feel free to let us know how you identify so we can include you all next time. All right, and I wanted to definitely include this last question in terms of what folks are feeling today. Just to acknowledge, we just rounded out 2020, which was a huge year in a lot of ways, unfortunately negative ways for a lot of us. But I wanted to just ground us in what we're feeling today. So I'm happy to see that the majority of folks checked off hopefulness, which is great to see. 76% responded that way. 33% though, I do want to acknowledge that worry is also amongst everyone today. Excitement, 30%, sense of community, 21%, anger, confusion, sadness. So it looks like we're all kind of a mix of emotions. Hopefully that sense of community goes up, maybe ticks up a little bit after today, but we'll see. But thanks everyone again for participating and sharing. We'd love to just see who's on the call. All right. So just to, again, acknowledge this moment, we wanted to just keep it real and make sure that we are not, glazing over anything. So with the events leading up to yesterday's inauguration, we are reminded of the circumstances that brought SEA communities to the US. Southeast Asian Americans fled violence and political persecution, seeking a safe haven for their families and children. And the insurrection that occurred this month at the Capitol undermines the value of democracy and freedom that many in our communities have fought so hard to secure for their loved ones. So we condemned the insurrection and still hold all of those who enabled it accountable. And we just wanted to ground today's call with it being the first call since those events in that statement. And our full statement is included in your list of links that Gina will be sharing through the chat function. But I will kick things off with our national policy priorities for this new administration by going into the 2020 census. So I recognize a few names on the guest list who worked with us on 2020 census outreach and education for the community. So just wanted to first go over some recent updates. So the first one is the Census Bureau Director, Stephen Dillingham, has resigned amidst the most recent controversy surrounding the Census Bureau's handling of the 2020 census, in which internal whistleblowers claimed that Dillingham's #1 priority, quote, was to produce data on undocumented immigrants before the end of Trump's presidency. And whistleblowers claimed that that product would be, quote, statistically indefensible. The Office of Inspector General inquired with Dillingham on deadlines, purposes, everything to do with that, those claims. And stakeholders are considering who would be a good candidate to replace him and what to do structurally to the Census Bureau to prevent future incidents. They also wanted to go over the recent update that a federal district court has approved an agreement by the Trump administration to stop all of its efforts to publish the 2020 census count and any citizenship data for apportionment and redistricting. And the bottom line here is that the 2020 census results for apportionment and redistricting will come out under the Biden administration, not the Trump administration. So a court order is backing that outcome, and given President Biden's statements condemning the exclusion memo, and I can also go over his recent executive order, that Trump exclusion memo to exclude undocumented people from the count should not be carried through, and it's not looking like it will be carried through either. In terms of what we will continue to prioritize in the new administration is definitely wanting to stay true to our call for postponed statutory deadlines for the delivery of that apportionment and redistricting data, as well as the convening of a congressional commission with joint appointments by the Speaker and majority minority leaders in House and Senate to review the entire 2020 census operation, with a particular focus on the Bureau's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the administration's interference in census operations, basically in order to make policy and legislative recommendations overall. So that's covering the census front. Gina has been sharing resources in the chat for more information on that. And again, feel free to send any questions through the chat or the questions function. But for now, I will pass it off to Com to go over the rest of our national policy priorities.
Hi, everyone. With the new administration and a democratically controlled House and Senate, we're feeling a little bit more optimistic than we have in the last 4 years, but acknowledge that there's still going to be a lot of barriers and challenges to many of the priorities that we have federally at CRAC. Moving into COVID-19, I'm going to really just cover some of the priorities that CRAC have identified. Not all of them, but just some of the key ones, and then quickly go over some of the details that we've gotten from the Biden administration regarding what we can expect to see in his COVID-19 legislation that he'll be trying to push out through Congress. So for CRAC, we know that Southeast Asian Americans have been heavily impacted by COVID-19, even though that's not reflected in the broader racial data that has been released because there's no mandate to disaggregate the COVID-19 data. On our end, some of our key priorities include making sure that there's no cost testing and treatments and vaccines for all US residents. Right now, there are still buckets of our communities who are not able to get testing and treatment because they don't have access to healthcare. Additionally, we're pushing for equitable and accessible vaccine distribution that prioritizes vulnerable communities, including Southeast Asian Americans. One of the major priorities at CRAC is just this, making sure that racial and ethnic data are disaggregated. So again, we're pushing for the collection, analysis, and reporting of race and ethnicity data for testing, treatment, and deaths related to COVID-19. And not listed there, but we're also pushing for vaccine data as well. For the stimulus payments, we're also pushing for 2,000 cash payments for all Americans, including those who are I-10 filers and don't have Social Security numbers, but do have work authorization in the U.S. We're also, we also believe that it's important for the U.S. to suspend rent and mortgage payments for individuals who are unable to cover the cost because of COVID-19, and really looking at, trying to work with the federal government to incentivize ways to suspend those payments. Additionally, we want to make sure that whatever materials are being put out on COVID-19 related to testing, treatment, and vaccines are accessible to all members of our community. So really making sure that, that the federal government allocates funds to provide translations in Cambodian, Hmong, Lao, Vietnamese, and other Southeast Asian languages regarding federal programming and support that can be provided to families. Additionally, in the way that, we also recognize that students and parents have been heavily affected by COVID-19 as well. So making sure that, the work that we're doing accommodates English language learners and all students, regardless of their immigration status, in efforts to close the digital divide as students continue to do distance learning during this time. We continue to push for the suspension of all immigration enforcement during COVID-19 because we recognize that the deportations and the detentions that have been done by the Department of Homeland Security have been one of the major spreaders of COVID-19, not just in the US, but worldwide. And again, we're also pushing that the federal government use all available discretionary powers by Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Customs and Border Patrol to release all immigrants possible from immigration detention. What we know right now of, next slide, what we know right now of the Biden COVID-19 proposal is that, they'll take pretty aggressive steps to mount a national vaccine program to contain COVID-19 and to safely reopen schools. The Biden administration has made it a priority to find a way to safely reopen schools within the first 100 days of his presidency. Some of the other items that we can expect in a proposal is setting up community vaccine sites, scaling up our testing and tracing, and investing in high quality treatments, and providing sick leave to contain the spread of the virus. Biden has also committed to trying to get $1,400 per person checks to households across the US, including for I-10 filers. The idea is that the $1,400 will build on the $600 that people have received in late December, early January, to bring it up to $2,000. And again, they would also just extend the expand the support that is being given to folks in the U.S., including direct housing assistance, nutrition assistance, expanding safe and reliable childcare and affordable healthcare. He's made a commitment to increasing the minimum wage to $15 through a COVID-19 proposal, and then extending unemployment insurance as well, including for those who are not traditionally covered by unemployment insurance. One of the other major buckets for I already mentioned it, but one of the major buckets for CRAC in our work this year is data segregation, and we're relatively hopeful that we can push the federal data segregation effort further than we've been able to in the last administration, even during the Obama administration. So really, our main crux of this work has been to require the collection, analysis, and reporting of disaggregated race and ethnic data across all federal agencies, sub-agencies, and state institutions that receive federal funding. Next slide. Within the education space, next slide. Within the education space, these are some of the key priorities that we have for the 117th Congress. So it's really reauthorizing the Higher Education Act and incorporating civil rights principles into that piece of legislation. And the Higher Education Act is really the single piece of legislation that sort of governs a lot of our higher education institutions. Additionally, we want to make sure that we're increasing funding for the Anaphysis program. So the Anaphysis program is the Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islanders serving institutions that came about in around 2007 as a result of some of the work that CRAC had been doing, that provides funds specifically for colleges that have a large amounts of Asian American and Pacific Islander students, and has a large amount of low-income students as well. And this basically just allows those schools to get federal funds to specifically do targeted support for AAPI students. We continue to push to significantly increase Pell Grants, and then to create and expand federal college and career opportunities for students, including expansion of the TRIO program, GERA program, and the outreach that they do to Southeast Asian American communities. Additionally, we're also looking to authorize and fully fund grant programs to states to disaggregate student race and ethnic data as well. And then we're also looking to make sure that legislation is being introduced and passed that creates safe and inclusive learning environments for marginalized students, including for Southeast Asian American students, and that these bills also invest in the social and emotional needs of students. Within the health space, CRAC's priority is really focused on culturally and linguistically appropriate care. So specifically, we're looking to increase funding and increase access for health and mental health services that are culturally and linguistically appropriate. We're looking to expand healthcare access for Medicaid recipients, and to remove barriers to Medicare for recent immigrants. I think folks may have seen that in late December, Congress lifted or restored Medicare access for COFA migrants. So, one of the other major hurdles is removing the 5-year bar for recent immigrants to get Medicare access. We're also looking to increase funding for community-based organizations and clinics so that they can provide direct service supports of children and families. And then we're looking to create programming and resources that allow for culturally and linguistically appropriate preventative and early intervention mental health services for all individuals, regardless of age or immigration status. Within the immigration framework, CRAC's priorities have remained very consistent throughout the years. Our main priority continues to be ending the detention and deportations of all Southeast Asian Americans, and broadly ending the detention and deportations of all individuals in the U.S. We're also looking specifically to find federal opportunities to create a pathway to return for folks who have been previously removed from the U.S. Just because for many of the Southeast individuals who've been deported, they are generally permanently barred from returning to the U.S. except for in exceptional circumstances. We're also looking to streamline the family immigration system by eliminating the family visa backlogs. As folks may have heard, there are about 1.4 million Asian applicants who are still waiting, and oftentimes they can wait for 20 plus years. And we're also looking to expand the definition of immediate family so that we can expedite the process for folks who are trying to immigrate to the US through that process. And we're also looking to try to prioritize accessible and affordable naturalization and generous fee waivers for those who are trying to naturalize. And part of this is also trying to change the new standard for the 2020 citizenship test that was implemented late last year by the Trump administration. Next slide. So that's basically it for the federal policy priorities of CRAC. This doesn't encompass all of our work, but it encompasses most of the priorities that we have federally. And again, we're still combing through the executive orders and some of the memos that have been put out by the Biden administration yesterday. And I believe that our team will send out follow-up emails with more information on it as we finalize some of our analyses of the most recent policies. But I'm going to turn this over to Mandy, who will talk about our California work.
Thanks very much, Com, and great to be with everyone today. On the California front, I think it's probably redundant to say that it's been a difficult year, from COVID to the movement for Black Lives to the breadth of wildfires that our communities has experienced, and also having many of those factors affecting and creating displacement and economic difficulties for a lot of our communities. But with the new Biden administration, we are operating with a slightly more optimistic landscape, and we do expect to be better represented in the administration and discussions with the administration, given that the new VP is our former senator, and we also have our former attorney general and also district attorney from San Francisco within the administration, and with strong ties to California, to our governor, and to our state leaders as well. With regard to the election back in 2020, we did experience quite a few disappointments with outcomes on the California ballots specifically, but I did want to open with some wins as well through California. And some of the new laws that are in place now took effect on January 1st of this year. And so I wanted to highlight some of those that are relevant for our communities. So on the health front, there are now strengthened health and safety protocols in the workplace, where employers have to notify employees if there are any detections of potential COVID-19 exposure. There's also more inclusivity in emergency planning for the state, including for our community members who are elderly, who have physical or mental disabilities, or language barriers. On the health insurance front and coverage, health plans must now increase the list of mental illnesses that are covered, ranging from ADHD to substance abuse concerns that were not previously covered. And there's also minimum wage increases, although the amount varies by county and depending on business size as well. On the education front, there is a new ethnic studies requirement for students who are graduating college from any Cal State university. And this is important in setting the momentum for a potential ethnic studies mandate for high school graduation across the state as well. On the criminal legal system front, there are now more protections for youth when they encounter police or law enforcement. There's now more compassionate policies and workforce development support for inmates who helped us fight our wildfires. And something that might be a surprise to many that it actually wasn't a law that was in place is the passing of the Racial Justice Act that now allows defendants to challenge their case if they find any evidence or potential evidence of racial bias across the legal system. So that includes bias from jurors, lawyers, law enforcement, and it actually also considers or puts into consideration the disproportionate impact and different sentencing history of different racial groups. So now that we're in the beginning of a new legislative cycle in California and many bill proposals have already come into place and there's still a little bit of time left for folks to continue introducing a few more, CREC will speak to some of the opportunities on the horizon in California that align with our priorities for Southeast Asian American communities. And it's important to note that many of these are moving pieces and may evolve significantly in the next few weeks or months. And that's also why this is more of an overview of the opportunities as we monitor the landscape and continue deciding on our priorities at the state level. So on COVID-19, there are definitely multiple efforts to address pressing matters related to coronavirus. And one of those is to increase tenant protections as well as homeowner protections. And that includes extending eviction moratoriums. And there are several bills on the horizon and they differ and are based on different considerations. There's also efforts to address the digital divide and education access through increased broadband infrastructure and improving internet connectivity for many of our youth and students. And there's also talks of additional economic support in addition to what's already been proposed for undocumented and low-income Californians. On the education front, the effort to reintroduce ethnic studies as a high school graduation requirement is back on the table. And that was unexpectedly vetoed by the governor last year, despite successful efforts to move that through the legislature. And this piece of policy is being done in conjunction with advocacy that CREC is doing with the California Department of Education on the ethnic studies model curriculum that many school districts and instructors and teachers will be able to use as a resource, especially when a mandate is in place. And then there's also funding and policies to implement a significant data information system on students and relevant workforce data so that there's more information and more disaggregated data to inform decision-making. And along that lines, other investments as well to support teacher development, professional development, and also to hire more qualified instructors. And on addressing school reopening and learning loss, and this is definitely a rapidly moving piece with lots of conversations going on, there was also a proposal through the governor's budget with various incentives to get schools to reopen and get our students back into school. On the health front, back on the table as well are two bills, and the effort is to expand Medi-Cal coverage for all Californians, including both undocumented folks as well as elderly who were left behind. And because of the coronavirus, improving access to telehealth services and training for behavioral health workers at schools who come into contact with students. And there's also a slew of bills that are focused on the criminal legal system to increase qualifications, training, and education of law enforcement and peace officers, as well as additional funding to support community organizations that are providing legal immigration services from naturalization to anti-deportation defense. And we're also working on advocating for additional funding to support our community partners who are doing that work, especially with the enhanced and increased difficulties to do case management and do that work during COVID-19. And then there's a few other bills that don't fit neatly into our priorities, but there is a potential bill commemorating Black April, as well as several relevant workers' protections bills. And probably the most pressing effort right now are a slew of bills to improve the Economic Development Department, EDD infrastructure. And currently CREC is advising and providing input on a bill focused on language access specifically, and infrastructure improvements like phone line access and language access for unemployment benefits. So everything mentioned here is really just a sliver of the opportunities that are out there, and we know that there's still a lot of work to be done to better support our communities during this time. And at the California office, we just have a nimble team of 2, but we're continuing to monitor the developments in the legislature, as well as continue our administrative advocacy with the governor's office on pardons and commutations, with the California Department of Education on ethnic studies, as I mentioned, as well as other entities. And then we'll continue to monitor the landscape and opportunities to prioritize our advocacy efforts. With that said, I will send it over to Alyssa for our campaigns.
Thanks so much, Com and Mandy. I know it's not easy to condense all of your policy work into 15 minutes each maybe, but thanks for that overview. And just encouraging folks on the call to continue to share any questions, clarifications that you might want to ask our team through these Zoom chat, Zoom questions, or if you're on Facebook Live through the comments. But yes, as Mandy mentioned, I will pivot us to our ongoing campaigns. And I'm going to focus today actually on just one, which is the New Way Forward Act. And just to start off with a little bit of background, in the same era as the infamous crime bill, Congress passed anti-immigrant laws in the 1990s that drove mass detention and deportation of people of color. And these laws are tied to the immigration system, and they tied it to the criminal legal system, which is built on racism. Those 1996 laws, particularly the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act and the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, established mandatory detentions and automatic deportations, heavily expanded crimes considered deportable, and restricted judicial discretion for many immigration cases. Because of the retroactive nature of these laws, this should definitely matter to Southeast Asian American communities if it doesn't already exist on your radar, since many Southeast Asian American refugees suddenly became deportable overnight for convictions prior to 1996. And since, though many have already served their time, have families, and have turned their lives around, immigration and customs enforcement continues to detain and deport Southeast Asian Americans. More than 17,000 Southeast Asian Americans have been ordered removed from the US, with over 2,000 individuals deported since 1998. Roughly 15,000 Southeast Asian Americans currently live with a final order of removal, and roughly 80% of those removal orders are based on past convictions. The New Way Forward Act is a blueprint for writing racism out of our immigration laws that complements all legislative proposals. It will restore fundamental principles of due process and compassion to an immigration system that is cruel and abrasive. Just to give a little bit more information on what this bill does, it pushes back on mass incarceration, it ends mandatory immigration detention, and bans for-profit immigration jails. It restores vital due process protections, ensuring immigration judges are no longer forced to deport people automatically, but can instead consider the individual circumstances of people's lives so they can remain in the US. And it allows community members to move forward with their lives without fear that an old sentence could lead to deportation many years later. It strengthens fairness, allowing independent federal judges to review certain decisions of immigration judges that the 1996 laws unfairly tried to remove them from judicial oversight. It ends federal prison sentences and criminal prosecutions for people who cross the border seeking freedom, safety, opportunity, or to come home. A law originally authored in the 1920s has fueled mass incarceration under recent administrations of both parties. It addresses racial justice, limiting deportation for convictions steeped in racial profiling. It protects local resources, ending the harmful practice of local police acting as deportation agents or carrying out mass deportations with ICE. And it creates a process for people previously ordered deported to apply for the opportunity to come home to the US and reunite with their families. We need a pathway for people to be able to return to their families and their communities and their homes in the United States. So in terms of when this bill is being introduced, a New Way Forward is going to be reintroduced this coming week on Monday, the 25th, by Representatives Garcia, Jayapal, Bass, and Presley. And in terms of what you can do to support, we encourage everyone here on the call to amplify it to your networks, and contact your members of Congress to urge them to pass the New Way Forward Act. There's a toolkit with some sample messaging and graphics to come that we're working on in coalition. But we do want to establish that you know, we don't want to be overly optimistic and recognize that this is really just a messaging bill. As I mentioned, it just outlines a blueprint for how to eradicate some of the racism that underlies the immigration system. So even if it doesn't pass, we have this messaging to look back on. And with that, I will hand it over to Sina to close us out with the announcements before we head into Q&A.
Thanks so much, Alyssa. So much going on in this new year. So really appreciate all the policy updates as well as campaigns in the community. I am just going to go over some of our opportunities and perfect, thank you for the slide. Right now we have internships available at CRAC, and we're having 2 positions available. And so if those who are interested are self-starters and interested in amplifying our spring 2021 communication efforts, our field teams mobilization and campaign efforts, with these positions would be great for you, our communications intern as well as a field team intern. And if you're interested, the information is on our website as well as the links left in the Zoom and our Facebook Live. You can find it on our website as well. The communications intern in particular and the field team intern in particular, the periods are available there for you to see in applying, and we definitely welcome all students and interested community members. So please do tap in for the opportunities. Next slide. And we also have another opportunity to engage in terms of giving your input. It's so important right now to connect with our students, our community members who are virtual learning and continuing to cope and do studies on a platform where it's virtual. And so our policy team, in particular education, department would really love to hear from you and college students. So we'd love to hear about how the impact is going for you in higher education experience. It is a short survey, and those who do contribute your experience as well as input will be eligible for a $100 American Express gift card. So hopefully that will also be helpful to participants of the survey, and it will really be helpful to inform our education policy advocacy. So all input is confidential, and it is going to be an aggregate form, and so no one will be identified with your information. So this will really help in terms of knowing how our community is doing, how our students are doing, and how we can best support you. And our last opportunity to also help inform our work is in the caregiving department, and there is an event coming up for caregiving elders in our community. We are co-hosting this training virtual, and it is meeting the needs of Southeast Asian caregivers. We host this event with our close partners at the Direct Elders Coalition, where we are working to help understand the experiences of Southeast Asian caregivers and improve our capacities in our community as caregivers, and how to help inform the ways in which our community is unique in providing care for our elders and our parents. And so this event in particular is training next Thursday on the 28th, and it is free and co-hosted by the Direct Elders Coalition, where those who are caregivers in our community, when you do sign up and register, we will go over the information that is been imparted from a long 15-month research curriculum. And so this will be really helpful to inform not only caregivers, but facilities during this time that is so important to make sure our community members who are caregiving for our elders get the resources as well as the information about our translation needs, tools, and ways to safely and with our needs and with our customs in mind. And so, so very important during this time to make sure our elders are taken care of properly. And so with that, those are the 3 opportunities right now that we have for community to tap in, support one another, and get involved with CRAC. And I believe that ends the majority of the presentation. And so I would like to go ahead and move us into any questions and comments that community would like to share with us if you're joining us today. And Gina, if you would like to go over the logistics of participating in the Q&A.
Sure thing. So thanks, Nina, for sharing all those updates. We're moving into our Q&A period now. So as we said earlier, please feel free to share in the chat function, which is in your control panel at the bottom of your screen. You can also click raise hand if you would like to verbally share out your question. If not, if you're not comfortable being on camera, you're free to use the Q&A or the chat function. So we'll just pause here and wait for folks to gather their thoughts and share any of the questions that they might have for our panelists today. Okay, so we do have a question here. Someone asked, how is CRAC generally feeling about these policy priorities for the new Biden administration? Do you feel optimistic? Do you think that they will be helpful with these policy priorities we have or not? And I will pass it over to our policy team to explain that.
Thanks, Gina. So I always operate in sort of worst case scenario, but we are relatively optimistic about some portions of our policy priorities, particularly in the areas of education and health. I think we are also relatively optimistic about some of the immigration priorities, particularly around family immigration and naturalization. With regard to ending detention and deportations, we're in a better place than we've been for a long time. But I think it's still an uphill battle, and it'll take a lot of grassroots work to push new elected offices to be more receptive of the issue, while also simultaneously working within the Beltway to educate a lot of the new and current members of Congress and even the president's team about the necessity of the issue. I think because of how complicated some of the deportation cases can get, I think there's what we've seen is that there's been a lot of confusion and a lot of hesitation, even for more moderate left-leaning members of Congress. But the short answer, relatively optimistic. I think we're in a better place than we've been in the last 4 years, and I think we are also in a slightly better place than we were during the Obama administration. So, we're optimistic-ish.
Thanks so much, Com. We do have a question here. Someone asked, is it too late for colleges to apply to get designated as an Anaphysis institution? Com, I know that your focus isn't on education right now, but just wanted to check if you had any insights on that.
We can get back to you. I'd have to double check with Anna Byun, who is our education policy manager, to just double check on the exact dates regarding NPC designation. But we'll follow up on that one.
Got it. Thanks, Com. We do have another one here about some of our census priorities. Someone asked, can you explain a little more what Biden's executive order about Trump's census exclusion memo? Alyssa, if you could just explain a little more what specifically that new Biden executive order does for our census priorities.
Sure thing. Yeah, so like I mentioned, that lawsuit is basically barring any of that apportionment or redistricting data from coming out. So it's now going to come out under the Biden administration. And President Biden issued an executive order basically revoking President Trump's policy of excluding undocumented immigrants from the 2020 census data used for apportionment and redistricting. I will say that the executive order does not address the previous Commerce Secretary's directive to use records to generate anonymized block level data about the US citizenship status of every adult living in the country. So we are working with our coalitions and other stakeholders to basically figure out if we can get clarity on what will happen to the records that the Bureau has compiled and any data it has produced. But for those on the call, basically bottom line is that President Biden's executive order reversed and revoked President Trump's policy of excluding undocumented folks from the census count.
Great, thanks so much, Alyssa. Any last questions here?
I see one. If policy or Alyssa knows for clarification regarding the student survey, our student survey, if it's looking for just undergraduate responses, or can graduate students also participate?
I can take this one. Yes, so just to clarify, the survey is only for undergraduate students who were undergrad students from March 2020 through December 2020. And it's limited to students in the United States as well.
Last call for any other questions. Again, feel free to press the raise hand button. You can use the Q&A function, or you can send those questions to us through the chat box. Okay, looks like we do have someone who raised their hand. Isaac, I'm going to unmute you now. Isaac, go ahead. Hi, Isaac, can you hear us?
Oh, okay. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Isaac. Can you hear me?
Yes, Isaac, we can hear you. Great, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. This is my first time on your call. I appreciate the opportunity. And so I'm from Wisconsin, and it's great to meet each and every one of you. I've emailed your organization. Com just responded to me recently, and I've also emailed Neri on the situation too. Specifically on the visa sanction against the country of Laos, the one issued on April 10th, this memorandum was set to expire on December 31st of 2020. Do we know for sure and based off of the executive orders that Biden signed off yesterday, do we know for sure if there's been a lift on the visa sanction against Cambodia and Laos yet?
Yeah, I can take this on really quickly. So the April executive order that issued the initial immigration ban was expanded in June 2020. So the December expiration for that initial executive order actually got pushed back to March 31st of 2021, I believe. We're still combing through the executive orders from President Biden, so we can't say for certain whether that the immigration ban's been lifted. But we do know that President Biden had listed it as one of his priorities to remove. I will say that the sanctions on Laos and on Cambodia are actually separate from the executive order. So the immigration ban is an executive order that bans immigration generally to the US, couched under protecting jobs and COVID-19. The visa sanctions on Laos and Cambodia are regulatory actions that came about from the Department of Homeland Security, rather than through executive orders. So what needs to happen is actually that the Department of Homeland Security needs to lift those visa sanctions on Laos and Cambodia rather than merely trying to undo them through executive order, because they're just separate entities. The sanctions on Laos in particular actually go above and beyond the immigration ban that Trump had put in place. And so that needs to be lifted through regulatory action, or through the Department of Homeland Security rather than just through executive order.
So can CRAC advocate for that? I mean, this is something that can be done through the Homeland Security.
Yes, so
Can that
I
be
don't
done
know.
quicker than through executive order? This would be a quicker route, wouldn't you agree?
So whether or not it can be done through executive order is something that we're in or conversation on, to be quite honest. The regulations are a little bit more, can be a little bit more complicated in terms of the process that it needs to go through. But that said, it's something that we've continued to advocate on to lift the sanctions on Laos and Cambodia, and actually on other countries that the U.S. had placed visa sanctions on, including places like Sierra Leone. But if you have seen the letter that we sent to the Biden administration lifting the visa sanctions on Laos and Cambodia is one of the top priorities of the organization, and will remain a top priority for us as we move further into this administration.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I believe there's also a question about redistricting and gerrymandering, and if CRAC will be providing any public awareness on this. You know, redistricting and gerrymandering are really important issues to CRAC and to the Southeast Asian American community generally. That said, it's also not an area that we have a ton of expertise on. We generally rely on the expertise of our partners at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC, and at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. And so while while we're still determining whether or not we have enough resources to do specific outreach on those particular issue areas. We'll likely be working with our partners to, at the very least, uplift information that is broadly applicable to Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islanders serving as Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities, and uplift those resources to within CRAC's network and to the communities that we serve. I think there's also a question regarding data segregation and what we mean when we say that we're closer than we have been before. So one of the big components of data segregation that we are looking at is that in the Trump administration, we saw a lot of opposition from specific ethnic communities to data segregation. And we also had an administration that didn't care about the issue. We are hopeful that, that President Biden and Vice President Harris are much more supportive of the issue, and that because we currently have a Democratic Congress where there are strong champions of the issue in both the House and the Senate, that politically we have a better landscape to just move the issue forward. I think when it became a major issue during the Obama administration, it was during the second term when we had a divided government and the issue was a little bit more difficult for us to move, just because it had become politicized in the middle of the second term. That it made it a little bit more difficult for us to just move the issue forward in the federal landscape. But I think, with just the way that the politics of everything have kind of lined up, we are a little bit more optimistic that we can try to move the issue much further than we have been able to in the last 6 years or so. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks so much, Com and Alyssa, for fielding the questions to community on Zoom and in our Facebook Live questions as well coming through. With a minute left, we do want to go ahead and start wrapping up the community call. And if there's any last questions, feel free to reach out to our policy team here or Alyssa, who is leading the community call for this session. Also, Gina, if you'd like to leave any last minute remarks, you can go ahead and close up.
Thanks, Sina. Yeah, we're just at about time right now. So if you have any questions, like Sina said, feel free to reach out. We'll close the loop on the questions that we weren't able to answer live today. And I will throw things to Alyssa to close out.
Thanks for everyone's closing out, but I'll just do a final goodbye. Thank you so much again for joining us for our first call of the year. We enjoy seeing so many familiar names in the guest roster, but as Sina and Gina mentioned, if you have any remaining questions, I've listed out the contacts here. And policy folks, I have the specific contacts. If you have any, education or immigration specific pieces, you can find their emails there. And last final call for the internship. Those applications are due Monday. If you know anyone who would be a great candidate, we'd love to just support leadership development within the community with folks that are in your network. So please do flag that application for them. But with that, I will close us out for real. Thank you so much again, and we'll see you all in February. Thanks, guys.